I'm the president of the New England Canada Business Council. We are very pleased to have you here. This is our third in a series of webinars in 2025 focusing on New England, Canada, U.S. Canada relations. The first two focused on tariffs. To show you how timely we were on those, during one of our webinars, the Trump administration tariff policy changed 3 times in 75 minutes. We think we're timely today. We announced this webinar before the scheduling of the Carney-Trump meeting in Washington. I like to think that perhaps NECBC had a smidgen of influence in bringing those two leaders of our two independent sovereign nations together. We're grateful to you for joining us. We hope that you understand that our role is to bring facts and advice and experts to you on these critical issues of mutual interest. We are fortunate at NECBC to have two, as I said, great and sovereign nations who have been friends, sharing a common border, 5,500 miles, business interests, family interests, educational interests, cultural interests for generations. We've just had what I believe our experts will tell us is the most consequential Canadian election since World War II. Our leaders are meeting today. We hope that this will be the start of a constructive furtherance of the mutually beneficial relationship and the ties that have bound us and that are so precious to us over these many decades. Before I turn you over to our moderator, Peter Howe, and our absolutely terrific panel, let me give you a shameless plug for NECBC. This program is free, open to everybody, open to the press, recorded, available for later viewings. We are proud to do this, but we can only do it with membership support. If you're not a member, please look at our LinkedIn page and our website and consider joining us. Please come to our in-person events for which we charge a reasonable fee. Please think about sponsoring an event that we have coming up in the future. Thank you all so much. It's vitally important that organizations like yours, that individuals like you, and entities like NECBC continue our work together on this great, wonderful relationship between our two fabulous, sovereign, vitally critical to the world nations. Peter, let me turn it over to you. Thank you all.
John, thank you very much. And my great thanks to the NECBC staff as well for pulling everything together, getting everybody registered. We have a fantastic panel, got about an hour and 10 minutes, but I wish we had you all here for a week because there is so much to talk about. I think for the benefit of ensuring everybody is level set, I just want to read without comment a post from the president on Truth Social, in which he has said, this just went live before their meeting. I look forward to meeting the new Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney. I very much want to work with him, but cannot understand one simple truth. Why is America subsidizing Canada by $200 billion a year, in addition to giving them free military protection and many other things? And he continues, we don't need their cars, we don't need their energy, we don't need their lumber, we don't need anything they have other than their friendship, which hopefully we will always maintain. They, on the other hand, need everything from us. The Prime Minister will be arriving shortly, and that will be most likely my only question of consequence. So I stress that just as retweets are not endorsements, reading things aloud is not an endorsement, but I think it's important intelligence for all of us to have as we come into this. And I want to start off our panel with Monica Gattinger from University of Ottawa with the elections that we've just had, and ask you to kind of explain what happened across Canada on April 28th and what you see it meaning for the future. And if you've got any instant reactions to what you heard from our president, feel free to add in any thoughts there as well. Monica.
Great. Thank you, Peter. And thanks so much to the NECBC for inviting me to participate in this important conversation at such a pivotal time. John, I'm sure you're right that the reason they scheduled the meeting between the president and the prime minister at this time was because of this panel. So delighted to be here. Maybe just the one thing I would say about the president's tweet. I've always been of the view, and I think everybody on the panel is of the view, Canada and the United States are better together. We're better together across all measures that one can imagine. And I know we're going to dive into that more over the course of this panel. So as you mentioned, Peter, in Canada, we've just come through a very consequential federal election. The ballot question, essentially boiled down to which party leader Canadians felt was best positioned to lead Canada through an existential crisis. Canadians chose Mr. Carney, and he now leads a minority government, just a few seats shy of a majority. And this was really a remarkable turnaround for the Liberal Party, which was vying for its very survival a few short months ago. At that time, they were set to get wiped off the electoral map by Pierre Poilievre's Conservative Party. But that was before President Trump started imposing tariffs and repeatedly calling for Canada to become the 51st state. So, taken together, tariffs and the threat of annexation are existential threats to Canada as an economy and as a country. And as I say these words, I'm also watching at the same time. We've got the president and the prime minister speaking here. So, Peter, I want to just turn to you and see, do you want us to go to that, or shall we just carry forward? I think we're all, I'm sure, watching.
Let's go to the Oval
here.
Office. Let's go to the Oval Office.
I'm not sure that we have the capacity to bring in a live feed, but talk about the curse of good timing. Anyhow, we can assume that they will hew to the script, and we will have much more to say about that later. But no, I do wish this would be a great moment to be the CBC and able to toss live to Washington.
Well, and if there's something immediately breaking, I know one of you will jump right in and let us know.
All right, so let's do that. I will carry on, and for those who are able to watch and listen at the same time, please jump in. Please jump in and let us know. Currently, body language looks positive, and that's about all I can. Say.
I will say he just complimented Mr. Carney on one of the greatest comebacks in politics ever, maybe even bigger than his own, quote unquote. He's being very effusive right now.
Yeah. And again, that I think speaks to that phenomenal turnaround for the Liberal Party. And that turnaround really, in many respects, was as a result of, President Trump starting to impose tariffs, repeatedly calling for Canada to become the 51st state. For Canada, if you take those things together, tariffs and the threat of annexation, those are existential threats to Canada as an economy and as a country. And that word existential, it's being used a lot in Canada these days. And, to my mind, it's not an exaggeration. The existence of Canada as a country and its policy and economic sovereignty vis-a-vis the U.S., that's a through line that runs throughout our history as a country. It's really part of our political DNA. So when Canadians stop traveling to the United States, or they work hard to avoid buying U.S. products, it's because the president has struck a nerve, arguably the nerve in Canadian politics. And it's having real effects on the policy agenda here in Canada. Things, and I think this is really important for folks in the US to kind of be aware of, things long thought impossible in Canada are now starting to look possible and have shot to the top of the policy agenda. So removing internal barriers to trade so that we get more flows of goods between provinces, expanding export markets for Canadian products so we're not as reliant on the United States, so that our dependence, frankly, on the U.S. market can't be weaponized against us as it has been by the president in recent months. So that's really where Canadians' heads are at. And these are top policy priorities for the Carney government. So clearly, while today he's in the United States impressing upon the Trump administration the importance of removing tariffs and moving towards some sort of a resolution, all governments and political parties in Canada are really thinking through what is the future of the Canadian economy and what do we need to do to reorient things so that we're not as vulnerable in the future to these sorts of protectionist measures coming from the United States. And I would, just sort of add, nothing unites this country quite as much as threats coming our way from the U.S. So it's no mistake that Mr. Carney has invited King Charles to open Parliament at the end of May. It's an important symbol of this reorientation for Canada beyond North America. It's no accident that there's growing focus on developing energy and economic corridors in Canada to get more goods moving within Canada and off of our coasts to other international markets. It's a really broad agenda. But so long as there's a protectionist threat coming our way from the US, you can expect that it will continue to be a core economic objective for many governments here on the northern side of the border. But where I'm going to end, Peter, because I know we want to get on to hearing from other folks as well, is that Canada really needs to be careful in all of this. At the end of the day, as a country, we are geographically blessed to be located at the doorstep of the largest economy in the world. We've got a shared language, culture, history, family ties. And I have found it concerning to see the framing of the current conflict in Canada-US relations as a conflict with the US as a whole, rather than simply a conflict with the White House. It concerns me when political leaders in Canada frame the current situation as the end of Canada-US relations as we know them, because personally, I don't believe that to be the case. And it risks broadening the conflict beyond the current rift with the White House to a conflict with all political leaders and jurisdictions in the US. The NECBC is a visible bond of the strong bonds of a visible example of the strong bonds of friendship and commerce outside of the White House. So is the recent invitation from Northeastern governors to Eastern Canadian premiers to work together. So while the tariff war and the 51st state threats are not likely to go anywhere in the short term, cooler heads need to prevail. And I do see a lot of potential in maintaining and strengthening relationships at the subnational level. I hope that's something we can talk a little bit more about. And I'd like to congratulate the NECBC for playing an important role in this process.
Great. Monica, thank you so much. And I want to stay with our Canadian friends, Bruce Hartley and Bill Prstansky from Prospectus Associates. And I don't see Bill back on the screen. Bruce, do you feel ready to go, or should we? I know you're trying to listen to several people at once.
Not quite. They're taking questions now.
Good.
After their main statements.
Okay, well, let me ask Ann McKinney with the U.S. Chamber, maybe if we can turn to you and let's step back a little bit from the current headlines to the Chambers for a long time had a great interest in making USMCA, CUSMA a success, including adjustments when it comes up for renegotiation in 2026. But I'd love for you to take the opportunity to share how the Chamber is looking at this issue of successfully maintaining and improving U.S.-Canada commercial relations.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'd also like to start by thanking the New England Canada Business Council for the invitation to join you today and to congratulate you on your ongoing work to really educate and inform, provide facts, and demonstrate the breadth and importance of the bilateral relationship. So, I appreciate the opportunity to talk from the Chamber's perspective about the U.S.-Canada trade relationship, which is a priority for the Chamber and our members. Many of you may be familiar with the U.S. Chamber, which represents companies of all sizes and across every sector of the economy. Our members range from small businesses and local chambers of commerce to industry associations and large corporations. And we've been focused on advancing a pro-growth agenda, and trade, along with other policy priorities, really plays an important role in that. More than 40 million jobs in the United States depend on trade, and nearly half of U.S. manufacturing output is exported to customers overseas. So we're advocating for trade policies that help make the U.S. the best place in the world to invest, build, hire, and innovate, while also ensuring that U.S. companies of all sizes and sectors can sell their goods and services in international markets. And we believe that both the United States, Canada, North America overall is more prosperous and stronger as a result of the growth in our trade and economic integration. That's been, something that we've been building and working on for, the past 50 years, starting with the U.S.-Canada Auto Pact, the U.S.-Canada Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and then followed by a modernized state-of-the-art agreement with the USMCA. The Chamber was heavily engaged and invested in this process leading up to the entry into force of USMCA. We championed state-of-the-art provisions, pushed back against the threat to withdraw completely from the old NAFTA, and insisted on maintaining a trilateral focus to the agreement for the benefit of the region. So in terms of the administration, the Trump administration's goals to address unfair trade barriers, USMCA provides zero reciprocity for the vast majority, over 99% of U.S. trade with Canada, and most importantly, provides transparent and predictable rules for our trade and investment. And we've seen the benefits of this, we believe, in terms of, today we're one another's largest trading partners with deep investment ties. We don't just trade with one another, we make things together. And both countries really benefit from our integrated supply chains that support millions of jobs in both countries.
That's great. And just to follow up quickly, as we've approached the 2026 renegotiation of USMCA, what would you say have been, 2, 3, 4 of the biggest things that the chamber has said we probably want to revisit, rethink, rework these a bit?
Sure. I guess before getting to the USMCA review, just quickly, I want to share the Chamber's position on tariffs, because really the imposition of tariffs on Canada and Mexico using IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, as well as the tariffs that have been imposed under Section 232 on steel and aluminum, on autos and auto parts, as well as the investigations that are underway, really have an impact on this growth engine of our trade and investment, and really upends many of our commitments under USMCA. And so we have been also working to educate on the impact of tariffs, and in particular on small businesses, many of which, Canada is a top market, as well as Mexico. So just last week, we sent a letter to the administration to address the impacts of tariffs and to call for granting automatic exclusions for any small business importer, to allow time for the negotiations that are underway, that the U.S. is leading, with Canada and other governments. Also, to protect businesses of all sizes, we've called for establishing a process for companies to apply for an exclusion if the company can demonstrate the tariffs pose a risk for employment for American workers, and then provide exclusions for products that can't be produced in the U.S. or aren't readily available. So I just wanted to, share that proposal. We've been working to engage with the administration and members of Congress to educate exporters, small and large, on the impact on consumers, on manufacturers, as well as the impact of retaliatory tariffs. And really addressing tariffs is sort of the first step as we look ahead to the USMCA review. And some of the outstanding trade irritants that we've had. We believe that USMCA provides a vehicle for addressing those issues, and have long called on all three governments to uphold their commitments under USMCA, which is why I thought it was important to first start with the issue of tariffs. But in terms of issues with Canada, the approach to the digital services tax has been really a top concern for our members, as well as other digital policies that have hindered innovation in Canada. We'd also call on the full implementation of other commitments, including IP and some of the requirements of the IP chapter, in particular regarding the patent term restoration system. So I'll stop there because I know there's lots of other issues to
Thank
address.
you. We may come back and dive into those a little more. Marianne Marsh is a principal at Dewey Square Group and leading political consultant and analyst in New England. She also has a very interesting kind of third job explaining President Trump to the BBC every week. And I note with great admiration and pride, one of the very first journalists in New England in 2015 to predict accurately that Donald Trump would wind up winning the Republican primary that year. So, Marianne, I guess ask how you might try to explain this moment to Canadians in our audience in particular, and what do we make of all this, and what do we make of both actions and words that we're hearing these days?
Thank you so much, Peter. It's a joy to join you today and everyone at the NECBC to talk about this. I think the most important thing is to be just clear-eyed about who Donald Trump is, what he's doing, what he wants to do, and that's the best way to deal with it. So in the beginning, the first term, everyone's like, watch what he does, not what he says. It's always been both. And you can go back to 2015 when he first started coming down the escalator and his talk about immigration and tariffs and all of that, and bring it all the way forward to today. Everything he said then, he's saying now and going forward. But I think the overall political context matters a great deal. Donald Trump said that on his first day back in the White House, he would make everything better. And the reality is, in just over 100 days, he's made everything worse. He took a win that they claimed was a mandate, which was indeed only 1.5% win, which is the slimmest margin since 1968 and Richard Nixon, and going forward, saying that he can control everything, he can do everything. And that is not the case at all. He's managed just over 100 days to go from that very slim win to having the entire country turn against him in every single poll that has been published. Usually consider myself a bit of a polling snob and say, well, look at this one, that's the best track record. They're all in the same place. And in this case, the trend is not your friend. He is double digits underwater in every possible measurement that you can take, whether it's favorability, job performance, the economy, immigration, tariffs, all the things he ran on, he's upside down. And it's not just Democrats, it's overwhelmingly independents and even some Republicans, which is why you started to see Tom Tillis today, a Republican senator in North Carolina, go up oppose a U.S. attorney nominee in Washington, D.C. You're starting to see some cracks in that facade. So for the Canada-U.S. relationship, I would say to Canada, the tougher you are, the better you're going to fare. Everyone thinks that this is just, Donald Trump is strong. He can do this, that, and the other thing. The fact is literally everything he's done since he's been in office and every single executive order is illegal. Now, sadly, the media has fallen on its face, present company accepted, with the fact that he does not have the authority to say who gets money and who doesn't. He does not have the authority to declare emergencies. He does not have the authority to go into private educational institutions and tell them who they should hire, who they should accept, what they can say and what they can teach, or they're not going to get any money. Literally every single thing. Now, I have been peeking a little bit over here in listening to Trump and Carney go back and forth. Trump is insistent that Canada becomes the 51st state. Carney sat there like you would sit next to a relative who maybe got on in years at a holiday dinner, and you're kind of looking at them in disbelief about what's coming out of their mouth. But he made clear that that Canada is not for sale, never, ever. And certain things are never for sale. And he said he met with the owners of Canada during his campaign, and they made clear that Canada is not for sale. So it'll be interesting to see how they work this out. But so far in his presidency, anyone who stands up to Donald Trump in the courts directly to him in trade talks, anything, wins. So if you don't play, you can't win. But if you stand up to Donald Trump and use the tools that are available to you legally and politically, you'll win. And that's the reality. Now, sadly, there will be a lot of collateral damage along the way until the midterm elections, which I continue to pray we have. But I think in the meantime, everyone who stands up to Donald Trump individually and collectively is better, the better off you do. And I would just add one more thing. I was heartened to see that all of New England and the governors, except for Kelly Ayotte, putting a pact together with Canada and establishing its own relationship on trade and things like that. I think things like that, having the chamber stand up for all the businesses, having the Boston Chamber stand up for all the businesses, having this organization stand up really makes a difference. And there is strength in numbers. So the more people take on Donald Trump head on, the better off you're going to fare and the less damage that is going to be done while he remains in the White House.
Exactly the kind of trenchant, unvarnished analysis we've come to expect. So Marianne, thank you for that. Bill Prstansky, we'd love to go up to Ottawa and lay out, if you would, a picture of how you see, and Bruce can certainly join you as well, your partner Prospectus, how you see the next 30, 50, 100 days playing out for the Carney government, some of the challenges, opportunities, issues that they will be navigating.
Sure, thanks. And sorry we cut away to watch the uneventful back and forth between the president and the prime minister. The president kept calling him Mark, but it's better than calling him Governor Justin, I suppose. So we have made progress. So what did we learn from the recent Canadian election? Well, Canada has morphed into a two-party system, just like America. Less than 15% of Canadians voted for parties other than the Liberals or Conservatives. Politicians should learn from history, and clearly the NDP did not. You will all recall in 2010, the third party in the UK, the Liberal Democrats, had their best showing ever. I think they won nearly 60 seats, and they formed a coalition with David Cameron Conservatives, a little more formal than the Singh-Trudeau supply arrangement, but with the same results in the next election. The Liberal Democrats were reduced to 8 seats and the NDP were reduced to 7. So hence we have a two-party system in Canada. The problem the NDP had, they had no message on the doorstep. The voters would ask, why should I vote NDP when you just supported the Liberals for the past 4 years? Why not just vote Liberal? So they just went ahead and did. So I looked at some Angus Reid polling coming out of the election. They are indicating that 95%, just to show you the polarization in Canada that has taken place, 95% of Liberal voters have an unfavorable view of the Conservative leader. 87% of Conservative voters have an unfavorable view of Carney. And indeed, 66% of Conservative voters find him very unfavorable. So young people, blue-collar workers voted overwhelmingly for the Conservatives, while boomers and women voted for the Liberals. So we have a divided nation. So you're saying what's coming up in the next 100 days? Our divided nation kind of mirrors your political scene there. Prime Minister Mulroney always stated that the Prime Minister of Canada has two main responsibilities: the Canada-U.S. relationship and national unity. Well, today in D.C., Carney hopes to restart the process of defining a renewed economic and security arrangement with the U.S. And in fact, Trump did acknowledge in the Oval Office about 10 minutes ago that we are stepping up our commitment to security. Carney gave the president, he gave him kudos for actually reinvigorating NATO, of which he accepted. And he said that Marco knows what a great job I've been doing. National unity is the other key issue, and the Canadian political map shows a deeply divided nation. We have young versus boomers, west versus east, rural versus urban. So Carney's two challenges are just that. While he's redefining the Canada-U.S. relationship, he's got to hold the nation together somehow. So next week, you'll have a new cabinet sworn in. You'll see a lot of new faces. Some of the Trudeau era cabinet ministers who even got reelected will be dropped from cabinet. You'll see a little larger cabinet than Carney first had. He was at 23. It'll probably go up to 30. It'll still be gender balanced. He may introduce another 8 or so ministers of state, which is kind of junior ministers. Then we're going to have a throne speech at the end of May. Parliament will come back, elect a speaker. King Charles III has agreed to come and read our throne speech. The last time that happened was when Queen Elizabeth II read the throne speech in 1977 as she was on her Silver Jubilee tour around the world. And so then we've got to have the main estimates will have to be introduced and passed in the House of Commons. We'll have a budget, which we haven't had yet this year because of the election. and the suspension of Parliament, the prorogation that took place while the Liberals chose a new leader. So a lot will happen in Canada between now and whenever the summer recess happens in Parliament, which is probably mid-July to late July. So it's all the while we got a lot of business to do at home. I think Monica did mention that the barriers between provinces must come down and are coming down. Premier Ford and Premier Houston have taken a real lead in that. The Prime Minister has said by July 1st he wants an agreement between the federal government and the provinces on getting rid of all of the barriers to trade and the barriers of movement of people from province to province in Canada, which should have been done years ago, but has not been done. You know, you can't really enter into kind of a what's the new era with America on free trade if you don't have free trade between your own provinces. So I think we're going to clean that up. So lots going on between now and the summertime, and Prime Minister Carney has a big, a huge agenda, and we'll be moving forward on it.
Great.
So
Bruce,
just
I'd love to ask you for this, the results that we've seen in terms of the, division across Canada. Please correct me if I misunderstood this, but the greatest share of votes in Parliament seats in Parliament held by the Liberals and the Conservatives anytime since the 1930s, that sort of leave aside Quebec with the Bloc Québécois, but the sort of collapse of third, fourth, fifth parties. And explain to us what you see as the meaning of all that and the implications for how Canada negotiates and interacts with the U.S. going forward.
I mean, it's fascinating. As you said, it's, it turned into a two-party race. Both parties were over 40%. I mean, the thought of, the opposition party had 41% and they're in opposition is unbelievable. I mean, obviously the government had more than that. And it really boiled down to the ballot question, which we were talking about earlier. I'm sorry, I was having my ear on here. Just if I can just open up a quick parenthesis. So NAFTA was the worst deal ever.
Yeah.
And but now USMCA, that's not so bad, and that looks like that's going to be the basis of, I think, the discussion at lunch, which I hope they go to shortly. Anyway, no, what you saw in Quebec, and it was fascinating. So I was able to be on the auxiliary tour. So I with the former Prime Minister, and we went into Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Ontario, mainly, and we're doing rallies and some social media stuff, but also it was really interesting on the ground, especially in Quebec, where literally separatists would say to us, people who voted the Bloc Québécois and who will be voting Parti Québécois in the next provincial election, I'm sure, but they came up to us and think about it. To Jean Chrétien, they would say, I'm voting for Carney. Oh, we have to protect we have to protect Canada because, I mean, a joke, of course, was we need a country to separate against, but with the United States, French language, French culture, French institutions wouldn't stand won't stand a chance in an existential situation. And I think that's what you saw in Quebec, a lot of that happening, where people felt like this wasn't the time to be voting. We need a stronger government and Quebec presence within the government, and not in an opposition party representing the interests of, Quebec, as the Bloc Québécois always wraps themselves in that dialogue. NDP, what's fascinating though is that I think what surprised everybody was how the NDP vote split in terms of, if you look at border towns like Windsor, Ontario, the Niagara, Sault Ste. Marie stayed Liberal. And a lot of NDP voted there for the Liberals, but in Windsor, you had sort of that blue collar. They didn't go with the unions per se. They voted conservative, sort of like the Reagan Democrats version. And so that's very interesting. I think a lot of people have talked about that in the last few days around town here. That wasn't, people didn't see that in the data. So That was very interesting. And I think what happened there too, the last week of the campaign, we were all hearing Bill from his people mind, there was a bit of a shift going on. And part of that was, and I think there wasn't as much, how should I say, distractions come from the south of the border. And, the debate changed a little bit. And I think you saw quite a few ridings that became conservative, and that's how the Liberals didn't quite get to that 172. But it's still a very strong minority. I think Monica mentioned earlier that the opposition parties, other than the Conservatives, there's no mood or at all whatsoever for another election. Mr. Carney can rule, I think, comfortably for the foreseeable future. He has a strong mandate for what he ran on. And even the leader of the opposition this morning going into his caucus meeting was saying we wish the best for Mr. Carney in his meetings today.
Monica, I feel like
Bruce just touched on it at the end there. The best week of the campaign for the Conservatives was the final week. And in fact, the problem they had is 7.5 million people had already voted in the advanced polling over the Easter weekend. And in fact, you saw many ridings, probably 20 or 30 ridings that were going conservative, and then all of a sudden, when they counted the advanced poll, swung back to the Liberals or someone else. So, if we'd had another week, who knows what would happen? But either way, we have a very polarized country compared to the past. It's a very big issue.
Yeah, Monica, I thought it would be great to ask you to talk some about how you see Prime Minister Carney forming a majority. We don't hear, talk about a supply and confidence agreement, but more a lot of speculation about sort of issue by issue assembling the majority that you need in Parliament. I wonder if you can walk us through what you anticipate coming and what that means, particularly in the context of Canada-US relations.
Yeah, no, I think this is going to be issue by issue. I think Mr. Carney has made very clear that he doesn't intend to form some sort of an agreement with any of the other parties. I mean, maybe there are some conversations happening quietly about floor crossing, et cetera, but I don't see that as a super
Monica,
high.
they're happening.
Yeah, I don't see it as a super high probability, though. We'll see. He does have a very strong majority, and as Bruce just mentioned,
Strong minority.
a very strong minority. Thank you. And as Bruce just mentioned, the other parties are not keen to head back into an election at this point. I don't think Canadians, frankly, would want the country to head back into an election. So I think he's, at least for the foreseeable future, a good year or so, got some good runway to get some support and to build the votes that he'll need for specific measures. So, and again, I want to just I'll get to your question, Peter, about what this says for Canada, US, but I want to, Bill, I take your point about divided country, and on many measures, absolutely agree with you. Where I would disagree, though, is that on the issue of, Canada as 51st state, transforming the Canadian economy so that we've got more internal trade, diversifying our trading partners internationally, I think you see quite a lot of unity across the country. I think where we'll see how this evolves over time in terms of will splits start to emerge more visibly in terms of, well, what does, expanded trade of Canadian goods mean? Does that include oil and gas, or doesn't it? What level of support does the Carney government have for oil and gas pipelines, et cetera? So there's certainly some national unity issues on that front that we see Premier Smith from Alberta laying out some pretty substantial demands to the Carney government around various pieces of policy and legislation that were irritants under the previous Liberal administration that Prime Minister Carney is continuing with, things like an oil and gas emissions cap, Bill C-69, which is our environmental impact legislation, and have a range of measures that frankly, had a lot of folks in the West, notably, but also in other parts of the country, really not super supportive of the previous government. But that kind of got papered over frankly, in the election, because the ballot question really boiled down to the Canada-US relationship. So all this to say, Peter, I would say, on measures that deal with Canada-US, I think Mr. Carney can count on some good support and collaboration from the other parties. Notably, Canadians are looking for that. But I think on some of these other issues that Bill alluded to around some pretty deep divisions in the country on policy and ideological matters, I think it's going to be something that he's going to have to spend a lot of time on to make sure that he's resetting relationships, notably with the provinces, and perhaps having to rethink which aspects of his party platform he wants to move forward on and at what pace.
Yeah.
Monica,
We have a
thank
question
you.
open to
I got to
the-
jump in here. Sorry,
Yes.
Peter, real quick. Yeah, I mean, I didn't get a chance to reply to Bill. I don't believe the country is as split as Bill was sort of painting here. I would argue that the national unity has never been stronger in some ways. And yes, I mean, what Bill's referring to are certainly issues within the country that need to be addressed and that have been debated now for a couple of years. And but I think, and that with a fresh majority government, almost majority government.
Minority. You keep
Yeah.
saying majority. both
I
ways.
was trying to say strong majority. Sorry.
He will govern as if he has a majority, but he doesn't have a majority.
But no,
Uh,
I think
and
there's a
look,
willingness now between the provinces and the federal government to do things that they couldn't get done over the last few years. And
Well,
so
there's a
that's
willingness,
an
but-
opportunity that I think that can't be missed. And we're going to see, I think, premiers of all stripes with the federal government try to reach out and accomplish something that they haven't been able to.
Yeah, there's a willingness, but the proof is in the pudding. And, we've been talking about doing this for decades in this country. So we shall see if the existential threat of the becoming part of the United States moves the premiers to get something done. But I do want to come back to, let's be honest, there's going to be a referendum in Alberta in the next 2 years on leaving the country. I mean, they don't call it that. It's going to be being independent within the country, however Danielle Smith said it, but she's put the legislation in. She's going to pass the legislation. She's the majority, and there's going to be a referendum. So to sit there and think there's not a national unity crisis on the horizon, there is. So stay tuned.
Let me pivot to really the raison d'etre of the NECBC. Let's assume, and I grant this is a very big assumption, let's assume that we reach some new kind of relationship on trade and tariffs and related topics between the U.S. and Canada. At that point, and I put this out, I guess, really to all the Canadians, and Marianne would love to hear your thoughts as well. How do we undo some of what I've experienced as just deep hurt and anger on the part of so many Canadians who are, have been felt so blindsided, so abused unfairly in the way that they've been talked to by the top leader of our country? What does that possibly look like to get back to some version of the incredibly strong, warm, mutually beneficial relationship that our countries have had for more than a century?
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. I think first and foremost, everyone should remember that Donald Trump does not have the support of the majority of Americans. First and foremost, he's not speaking for the majority of Americans at all. They all disagree with him. So I think that's first and foremost. The other is having governors individually and collectively build relationships, talk about Canada, meet with different elected officials from Canada, establish those relationships so people in Canada see it's not all of us. It's not everybody in the country. It's not every elected official. Certainly Donald Trump in the White House has a huge bully pulpit and he uses it all day long, as we've seen today and every other day. But I think the New England governors, maybe absent Ayotte, some governors in the Northwest, governors in Michigan, along the border and elsewhere, the more that we can establish those relationships, going back and forth, having our own meetings, things like that is something that will speak volumes to all of this. And I think the one thing that Canada and the United States have in common right now is Donald Trump. that there is an overwhelming opposition to him. And it's the one thing that brings people together. And I don't think we can lose sight of that for all the bluster and Truth Social and all the claims of taking away money and all that, when he does not have the authority as president in the Constitution or anywhere else to do any of the things he said he wants to do, including the tariffs. So I think it's those, the more we have elected officials doing their own deals, doing their own trade, making those statements and demonstrating to Canadians that it's the minority and Donald Trump who are really slandering them and wrongly, the better off we're all going to be. I will add this. It is bad enough the United States did this once, but Donald Trump is even, more dangerous the second time. So once is a mistake. Second time is a choice, and then there's a pattern, and hopefully, being able to mitigate some of this. And my hope is Congress soon decides to take their power back on tariffs and funding and all of the things that only they are entitled to do under the Constitution. The more the country is able to mitigate this, and the more we can really escalate and elevate and more rapidly rebuild these relationships and do that publicly to demonstrate it to everybody.
Monica, maybe I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Do you feel like that's resonating with the average person in Canada, a distinction between our president and our population?
Well, I mean, a couple thoughts there. First, I would entirely agree with Marianne. I think that is exactly right. But on the domestic side here in Canada, there's been a couple of things that I've seen that have concerned me. And I'd have to go back in time to see. I don't know what the day was, but it feels like it was a specific day where all of a sudden political leaders went from saying, we don't have a problem with Americans. We know that you are also, addressing and dealing with, some of the measures that are being taken by your president. Our issue is with President Trump. Somehow that narrative kind of got dropped off. And now the narrative is much more around, the Canada-US relationship as we've known it is dead. There's far more sweeping statements. And, maybe that sells well politically. Bruce and Bill can maybe fill us in there on what some of the thinking is. But I think it's unhelpful. And my sense for the kind of the average Canadian is that it is going to take some time, and probably quite a lot of time, for that trust to be built back. I think it's a good thing that we're beginning to see more cracks forming in the United States. And so we do have, the overtures from the Northeast governors, I think is huge. Assuming that meeting goes forward with Eastern Canadian premiers, I think, those are the sorts of things that really start to show to Canadians, wait a minute, this isn't all of the United States, this is the White House. So that I think is really important. But over time, I would like to see Canadian political leaders start to do their part as well, to sort of talk people back to the reality of the situation, which is that there are very strong bonds that continue to be, continue to be positive and constructive. This is one part of the relationship, not all of it.
Great. Bill or Bruce, any thoughts there before I do have a kind of process for getting back to a more productive conversation question, but I don't know if you have anything you might want to add there. And so the question I have in mind is about, and this would be a great place for you as the chamber representative to step in. What might be some of the most productive ways to get back into a conversation about resolving these issues? And for example, Leo Desjardins from our board poses a very good question about, should we think about doing this maybe industry by industry? Let's first focus on automobiles and kind of, unsnarl the issues around, Ontario and Michigan and the Midwest, and then move on to, say, dairy, and then over to some of the issues you mentioned around the digital services tax and IP. Is there maybe some other, order of operations to get back into better economic harmony between the two countries?
Well, I think, the first step really, as the private sector, the Chamber's goal is to be a constructive partner to both governments to promote policies that help the business community grow to take advantage of USMCA. I think certainly looking at issues, sector by sector, it is one way to do it. It can even be done concurrently. I think we're encouraged that President Trump and Prime Minister Carney are meeting today, and in terms of laying the groundwork for a constructive dialogue on the bilateral partnership. USMCA, the USMCA review process, the USMCA review, as you know, is under the terms of the agreement, scheduled to take place in 2026. I think we were encouraged to see, President Trump's America First trade policy did include as one of the deliverables, a focus on USMCA and the public consultation process, which under the USMCA implementing legislation in the U.S. is scheduled should begin at least 270 days before the review, which would be sometime roughly October of 2025. So we see the review as an opportunity again for all three governments to focus on upholding the commitments in terms of compliance with the terms of the agreement and addressing some of the outstanding irritants.
Right. Marianne, maybe I'd ask you if you were advising the Canadians on what you think is going to be most effective in terms of a negotiating strategy with this White House and this president. Ideas.
I mean, I will go back to what I said earlier in the program, which is to stand up to Trump. I mean, he's folded like a house of cards every time someone stood up to him, and whoever stands up to him wins. That's number one. Number two, I think the media, both in Canada and the United States, needs to do a better job explaining to people what he's doing. So today, everyone's talking about tariffs and, he's going to impose tariffs on Canada. He's not going to undo them and all that. That should always be followed by, the president of the United States does not have the authority to do this. So everybody then puts into context what he's doing rather than reporting it like a fact. It is not a fact. Just because he says it doesn't make it true. And I think the third thing I really want to say to everybody on this call is I think everyone really needs to look at the true crisis the United States of America is facing to save its democracy and itself under Donald Trump. If you were going to dismantle the United States of America and its democracy, everything he's done in the first 100 or so days is exactly what you would do. Going after the media, going after academic institutions, going after judges, going after elected officials in Congress, going after our economy. All of those things are the pillars of a democracy. And to put it into context, Hitler dismantled the Germany's democracy in 6 months. Duarte did the same thing. Orban did it over 10 years. He's been in office for 14 or 15. Look at what Donald Trump has done in 100 days. He inherited a great economy. I can go down the list for Joe Biden's inflation faults. He got us out of COVID. If Biden had been in instead of Trump, 1 million Americans wouldn't have died. He's the second time he's inherited a great economy, and he tanked it already in the first 100 days. So I think everyone, the fight in the United States to save this country and its soul and its democracy is real. Do not underestimate how serious that is. So I think Canada can be maybe our sane sibling in dealing with him and dealing with all the problems that we face together. But I think Carney is a great guy to show this is how you deal with Donald Trump. And catching a little bit of visually of what he's doing and saying, I think that's exactly the right thing to do. So I think the more elected officials and other leaders in the United States and in Canada, and I hate this word, can model the way to deal with Trump, it will actually show other populations and leaders around the world how to do it too. And there are more people who want to see the United States stay the democracy it is and be successful than not. and there are more of us than there are of those who support him. And I think that's really important to remember and to join together, like organizations like this one, the Chamber and all. There's strength in numbers, and I think we have numbers on our side by far.
Any reactions from north of the border? I know that's a very strong and bracing viewpoint. But I do have one, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, Peter, you know, we do have a lot to put on the table, right? We have NORAD modernization. We have Arctic sovereignty. We're talking about building new military bases in the Arctic. We have critical minerals. We have heavy oil that your Gulf of America, I now say that, refineries need, because they are built to refine heavy oil, and we have heavy oil. So we have a lot to put on the table. And so the USMCA renegotiation will be important. But, you know, I think the Prime Minister will probably be saying to the President behind closed doors, before we get to that next round of renegotiation, which we all signed up for, you know, we got to solve this tariff thing. Like, we can't be having tariffs on steel and aluminum, quote unquote, illegally, as Canada would say, and as Marianne would agree with, before we start that negotiation. So that'll kind of be the first stage. How do they shake that out between the two countries before we get down to the negotiation? And I think what Anne is saying about your consultation in America will be as important as the one that we will have to do in Canada. I mean, Prime Minister Mulroney and his government, before they actually entered into free trade negotiations with Ronald Reagan, we created ITACs and SAGITs, and we had sectoral groups, and like we had a mammoth consultation. So we kind of had the data, and we knew what our objectives were, sector by sector by sector. So both countries will have to engage in that, and then get ready for the negotiation. And just a quick word on governors. I know it's the other side of the country, and you may not know it because you know you don't have friends in Alberta and BC, but Governor Newsom is making a direct appeal to Western Canadians. Please come back to California. We love you, Canadians. They love our little dollar, which is not quite as big as your dollar, but yes. So there's lots of reaching out going on the east side and the west side of the country. That's good to keep the relationship positive.
Before we go to some audience questions, just one more for the three Canadian speakers. What you make of King Charles coming to deliver the speech in person? You may need to do a little explanation for Americans, kind of the meaning of this speech, but the fact that he is coming in person, first time since, Bill, as you mentioned, since his mother was here in 1977. What does that imply and signify?
Well, he's the head of state for Canada. We have a Governor General in Canada that represents the monarch day to day. And the Governor General usually opens a parliamentary session by reading a speech from the throne. The speech is, of course, written by the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister, and it sets out the agenda for the upcoming sitting of Parliament. And so to have Prime Minister Carney made the invitation, it was accepted by King Charles III to come and do it. It's kind of a demonstration about our sovereignty to Americans. You know, we are a different country with a different system. We're your friends and we're allies and neighbors and trading partner, but we have a head of state that's the monarch, King Charles III, and it really is a kind of a statement about our Canadian sovereignty, in my view.
Could I maybe just add to what Bill has said, with which I agree? I mean, one of the first things that Mr. Carney did when he was first named prime minister prior to the election, right? So when that transition of power took place. So for the all of 9 days that he was prime minister before we headed into an election, one of his first actions was to go to Europe, right? And to meet with the UK, to meet with France, to meet with European allies. And I think that was, very deliberate in terms of this strategy around bolstering international trading partners beyond the United States. That obviously is not a years-long process. This is going to take time. We'll see how successful some of that will be. But I would also, in addition to what Bill has said about the king coming to deliver the speech from the throne, I would also note that there's some symbolism there too in terms of looking Europeward when it comes to Canada's trading relationships going forward.
And even
Bruce,
in that,
anything-
Monica, you're right. He did stop in and have an audience with His Majesty.
Yeah.
Bruce, anything you'd add to either of those?
No, I mean, it's obviously he had a pre-existing relationship. It's important on the sovereignty side. The king will read probably several portions in French, which is important because, the king isn't necessarily the most favorite person in Quebec, but it'll be important for him to communicate in French, which he will do. And it'll really sort of launch it's sort of like a real demarcation between the previous government and the next government moving forward.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Charles.
I don't think his
and
French is
McKinney,
quite as good as his mother's, which I heard was pretty good.
Or his
we've
grandmother.
heard-
Oh, good point.
We've heard certainly a very strong view of the Trump administration from Marianne Marsh, but I feel like it's important to maybe ask you, representing the U.S. Chamber, kind of the approach you've taken to working with this administration or trying to find ways to. I'm not suggesting you two are on. It's an equal time issue, but just kind of your own view on some of the issues of the way the administration has proceeded and how the chamber has chosen to work with the White House.
Well, thank you, Peter. I think, as I mentioned earlier, the Chamber's goal is to be a constructive partner, and we have always a commitment. Our North Star is to represent business and advocate for policies that are in the best interest of business. And we have, a longstanding policy over the course of our 113-year history to work constructively with whomever is in the White House. We think one of the results of the U.S. election was that Americans do care about the economy. In July, in fact, of last year, we launched, our growth imperative focused on policies. So we want to work with the Trump administration on policies that help grow the economy, make it a stronger place to invest and create jobs. We've been clear that we support many of the president's policy goals in terms of addressing unfair trade and non-trade barriers, increasing investment in the United States. And where we have concerns, we've also been vocal about identifying solutions, which is what I mentioned in terms of some of the policy proposals that we've recently put forward regarding tariffs, with ways to protect small businesses and other job creators in the U.S. on the negative impact that tariffs can have. So again, our goal is to be a constructive partner and find ways where we can work together and offer solutions where we disagree.
One big thing Prime Minister Carney has coming up, one of many, June 15th through 17th, the G7 coming back to
right.
Kananaskis, Alberta.
Right.
And open question as we speak today, whether the president will join there. But I'd love to start with the Canadians in particular. What you think are some of the stakes for Prime Minister Carney and Canada as the G7 comes to see your beautiful country?
Well, I think as soon as he finds out that there's some really great golf courses in and around Kananaskis, the president will come. It's a great opportunity for him to play a nice round of golf. It's, whenever you're the chair of the G7, it's really important. The issue I have with the G7, and it's a personal issue, is when I attended them with Prime Minister Mulroney, it was 7 people with 7 Sherpas in a room. The agenda was set by the chair, and the communique was written late into the night by bureaucrats who listened to the conversation and got the leaders to sign off. It was a truly leader summit. It's now a bureaucratic You know, they're saying, you know, to the Japanese as an example, you can only have 50 members of your delegation in Kananaskis just because of the living quarters. 50. And that you're gonna have to cut down from what, 500? So it's become a very bureaucrat. It's a different thing, but it's very important because you're setting the agenda in, you know, a world of turmoil. So, you know, you've got Ukraine, you've got Israel, you've got an economic downturn probably in many countries, and so you know, he's got to make the president comfortable to come and to participate, because the G7 without the G6 doesn't work. The president has to be there. America has to be represented. And I think today, I'm sure he will add that to the conversation and make it very clear that he wants input from the president on what the agenda should be. And he's just got to make it very comfortable for America to attend. Otherwise, why have the meeting?
But as if I can add to that, as I've gone many G7, G8s as well, is that what's the magic of Kananaskis, and Bill's making a joke down to 50. The fact is, in previous, a lot of these summits, you know, they're motorcades and people arrive late and they get going and there are too many people, hangers on, and all the side rooms and everything else. The beauty of Kananaskis is that everybody can either walk to all the meetings or golf carts. It's very intimate. And although the numbers are cut down, what it does enable leaders to spend more time together to get to know each other. And in crises, that becomes really important to be able to rely on the relationship and that they build in these meetings. And at one point, there are the retreats where it is only just the leaders for part of the day. So and I know the security guys love it because there are only black bears that are anywhere near the summit. But I think this year is really important for the world, and especially for this group of leaders to come together and really get to know each other and talk a lot of the issues, which obviously, as Bill said, the problem is the original idea was just talk economics, but now they deal with a whole list of world, you know, crises and issues that are ongoing.
Monica, any thoughts on?
Yeah, maybe just to quickly say, you know, I feel for the folks who are, you know, working on agenda and logistics for this, because I'm assuming that they have sort of two options. One is President Trump attends, and one is President Trump doesn't attend, and I suspect those are two very different looking meetings, and both entail enormous risks. So I think pressure's on, definitely. There's a lot of opportunity to be had, as both Bruce and Bill have made clear, but I think, you know, enormous risks associated with that as well, particularly for Prime Minister Carney. This will be, you know, a very important, let's say, second test, if the first test is happening right now as we're holding this webinar.
And think of Charlevoix, as the president took off and left Canada, he tweeted and he shot holes into the whole meeting. So, as you said, Monica, it's risky, but
Marianne, I
think he got through today. So,
and think of the Canadian government officials who've been working on the summit up until very recently. They've had two streams going, Monica, as well, a Poilievre stream and a Carney stream. So, yeah, I don't envy their job.
Marianne, you made a bold prediction about the future of President Trump in 2015. I wonder, do you see him going or not going to G7 and the implications of the decision he makes?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't thought about it, to be honest. I do imagine that the other members, on the one hand, want him there because he's president of the United States. On the other hand, they'd be relieved if he didn't show up. So it's so hard to predict what Donald Trump is going to do on any given day in any given situation, though I do think he loves the pageantry of meetings like that and being around other leaders and trying to exert himself to being the alpha of all alphas in this situation. And can he use it to his advantage to lord tariffs and other items over them during that meeting? And, you know, he historically has disrupted the meeting. So I won't be surprised either way.
And think of
Well,
it,
let me, before I turn it back
Macron
over,
and Trump are the two that have been around for many of these meetings, where the others are all rookies and showing up for the first time.
before I turn it over to John Gulliver to close us out and make sure we get you back to your lives on time as promised, I just want to mention an event coming up in New Hampshire at the Carsey School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire, including our own Tim Egan from NECBC. It's on May 14, 8 a.m. Tariffs and Tourism, What's Next in New Hampshire's Trade with Canada. We obviously, one of the many topics we got to today is the importance of state and provincial level strong trade connections. And that is a very live issue, and certainly lots of parts of New England worried about all the Canadians we will not see this summer, and hope we will get you back in future years. But with that said, John, let me turn it back to you for any kind of closing thoughts and the traditional benediction.
Well, first of all, I think this conclave beats any others that might be coming up in the next couple of weeks. I was very impressed at the insights, good humor, and sense of history that all of our panelists brought to this discussion. I'm grateful to you. We at NECBC are grateful to you. To our audience, you posed terrific questions. I wish we could answer all of them. Big takeaways. One, we need more dialogue like this all the time with multiple organizations, to take a phrase from you, Monica, at the subnational level. Okay, it's really important that states, communities, businesses, individuals, non-governmental organizations keep up this dialogue. Two, relationships change over time. They change over time in families, they change over time in business. They're going to change over time between two strong, allied, independent, border sharing nations. That's going to happen no matter who's in office in either place. Three, what I thought was really revealing from our Canadian friends is that there are a lot of domestic intra-Canadian issues at play here as well, just as we have in the United States, that do not directly affect the border, do not directly affect border security, do not directly affect north-south trade, but need to be dealt with by whoever is in power. So that will also take time and space, with the most finite, precious commodity we all have, our own time, on what we try to do with it. That's also going to be true in the United States. We shouldn't draw any adverse consequences from that as the process moves forward. Finally, this isn't going to end and be resolved in the next day, 3 days, 6 months. Probably the kind of schedule that Anne laid out on USMCA is one that we should keep our eyes on. Keep tuned. Let's see what the reports are from Prime Minister Carney. I understand he's supposed to speak at 3 o'clock at the Canadian Embassy today. We'll all be glued to that. I think we have 30 seconds left. So with that, I will give my thanks and gratitude to you all. Peter, we couldn't do these 3 webinars without your expert help. Thank you so much. And for our entire support team, many of names you don't know, but they're all here, part of the NECBC family and our board. We are a very hardworking volunteer board. My invitation to the audience, join us and help out for the next one. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.